Ah, the Lazy Susan, the ever-present mechanical marvel that's staple of Chinese restaurants everywhere. A spinning turntable brings an array of delicious dishes closer to you so you can enjoy the eating and waste less time on the foraging. But where did the Lazy Susan come from? Who invented it? And who was Susan? Historically, Chinese dining was conducted on square or rectangular tables, so the chronicle of the Lazy Susan doesn't start in China itself. According to some folk tales, it was invented by United States founding father Thomas Jefferson, who came up with the device to serve his daughter, Susan, who was also presumably quite lazy. Except, even though Jefferson fathered numerous children, legitimate and illegitimate, none of them were called Susan. The boring version of the story starts sometime in the mid-18th century, where in France, the étagères, later introduced in England as dumbwaiters, became common serving devices replacing the duties of maids and footmen. 100 years later, they evolved to round tables, which could be multi-tiered and spun drinks and snacks around to be easily accessible to your guests. At some point, someone thought it would be a brilliant idea to put a spinning table on top of a normal table. One of the first instances was a patent filed in 1891 by an Elizabeth Howell of Missouri. Her self-weighting table had a movable portion which was supported by rollers and mounted on a central pivot. In 1915, a Malaysian doctor, Wu Liande, had a similar idea but for very different reasons. Wu's writing portrayed communal Chinese meals as a hotbed of potential contagion, like pneumonia and tuberculosis, which wasn't entirely true by the way, as it turned out TB is airborne and not transmitted through saliva. But look, science aside, Wu's remedy was for the use of a revolving tray at a table where every dish had a special spoon, and diners could dip into the food without contaminating it with their own chopsticks. Unfortunately, there's no evidence that his proposal caught on in China or in Southeast Asia. Only 2 years later, in 1917, we arrive at the first verified mention of the term Lazy Susan, where a revolving server was advertised in Vanity Fair magazine for the fair price of $8.50. By the mid-1950s, Chinese restaurants were flourishing in the United States, and George Hall, a friend of one of the restaurateurs, toyed with some ball bearings and a round piece of wood, and put together what we know today as the Lazy Susan. In the succeeding years and decades, this device exploded into Chinese restaurants around the world. And in 1972, when US President Richard Nixon famously dined with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai during his visit to China, the Lazy Susan was front and center, basking in the glow of chopstick diplomacy.
喺酒樓嚟講咧，個轉盤嘅作用更加大啦，可以俾啲伙計可以唔使話分餐嗰陣時咧走來走去啦，分咗一張台面嗰陣時咧，一次過咧又美觀又整齊咁，然後咧將佢傳遞俾個客人咯。如果唔用個轉盤咧，佢哋有10個8個坐埋張台嘅話咧，要攞對另外一個餸咧就比較上咧要或者要企起身啊，或者要。另外對方幫你手遞個餸俾你啦，但係當你有個轉盤嗰陣時咧，佢個作用咧就發揮到出嚟咧，可以將嗰個轉盤嘅慢慢旋轉啊，將你中意嘅餸喺你面前你自己去夾啦。咁其實最好加埋你有個公筷啊，咁你根本喺個健康啊、衞生方面咧。
Lydia, when it comes to etiquette using the Lazy Susan, what are some do's and don'ts?
The most important thing is that the sitting position of the guest of honor and the host. Usually the guest of honor would be sitting at the best view position at the table. So normally that position would be roughly around there towards facing the entry of the room. The host would be sitting directly opposite. After everyone is sitting down, the host would actually invite everyone to start eating, but he would always invite the guest of honor to start first. Always a good manner to move the Lazy Susan clockwise.
Okay.
Yeah, you can move it anti-clockwise just a little bit. If you see a guest missed out a dish, and then you can move it backwards a little bit to allow that person to have the dish. Don't move the Lazy Susan at that time when they're getting the dish from the table. And then the rest of it is enjoy the food and then the hospitality and the friendship.
Very nice.
It's hard to imagine eating a massive Chinese banquet these days without the magical Lazy Susan. But wait, who was the infamous Susan? 250 years later, we still don't know. But what Susan has done is given us a gloriously fitting name to a gloriously fitting invention.